I'm here at the Stumpery in Doddington Place Gardens in Kent. And if you don't know what a stumpery is, it's an area, often a woodland area, created around dead tree stumps. When you cut down a tree stump takes a lot of time, effort and money to dispose of. And if you can leave it in your garden, it provides a wonderful habitat for insects, and of course you can then enjoy its beautiful sculptural shape. Doddington Place Gardens is a large garden. It has a sunk garden, a rock garden, a woodland area and more, and it's open to the public 2 days a week. But you don't need a grand garden to have a stumpery. You could do it with just one tree stump. And indeed, we're going to talk to Posy Gentles, who's done a stumpery in just a few square feet of her garden in town. I'm going to talk to Lucy Adams, the head gardener, and the gardening team here about how they created this stumpery and what the rules are that you can adapt for your garden. Lucy, you're the head gardener at Doddington Place, Lucy Adams, and Adam Roberts, gardener at Doddington Place Gardens. Yes. You've just done this stumpery literally in the last few months, haven't you? So Lucy, can you tell me why you decided to have a stumpery?
We decided to have a stumpery because, being that the garden's based on a big estate, we had a lot of stumps sitting around the yard, a lot in the pig area, and we were actually really drawn to the beautiful shapes of them. Mr. Oldfield has mentioned before that he had liked the idea of a stumpery, having visited Highgrove. So this year it was a big project. We felt that this area, which has always been something that we've not done anything with, it's just been a dip in the ground, actually lent itself to be the area we could make the stumpery in.
Some people obviously will be wanting to do a stumpery in a very small area. Adam, do you think it needs to be on a slope or a dip, or could it be a flat ground?
No, it doesn't need to be done on completely flat ground. However, you can always create a bit of your own mounds or something to stick stumps on as well to create a bit of change.
So Posy, tell me why you decided to have a stumpery.
I wasn't sure what to do with my front garden. It's a very small area, rather shady on a town street, and I'd planted an Amelanchier which was growing very nicely and allowing light into the sitting room at the front but providing a sort of screen. So a friend of mine who's a woodsman gave me some stumps. So I decided to have a stumpery, having read the book about Highgrove, on a very small scale. I've got a couple that are little, some of them aren't actually whole stumps, and then I've got one quite big one, which is probably about like that, which is the main feature. So I put it at the other end where the tree is, so it kind of balanced that out.
And actually the area of your front garden that is the stumpery is really only about 1.5 metres by 2.5 metres, isn't it? So it is quite a small area.
Yeah, roughly that. It is very small.
And what about other parts of a garden that you'd recommend people think about for stumperies?
Well, I think if you have a difficult shady area, it's an ideal thing to do. But I would say shady that's deciduous, because it gives you the opportunity to plant lots of little bulbs.
If you didn't have a friend who was a woodsman, how would you recommend finding the tree stumps?
Well, I would Google local woodsman, look on Facebook Marketplace, perhaps even ask at nurseries or garden centres.
So Lucy, tell me, could you just pick up a tree stump, or would you actually have to get in touch?
No, well, all land and woodland is managed or owned by somebody, so you must make sure you get the permission of the owners before you go and take up any bits of wood. There's a lot of people out there, like Forestry Commission and who, etc., that you'll be able to get in touch with, and you might be able to find that they're actually pleasantly helpful in helping you get some stumps. So,
did you have to actually dig the stumps up and then bring them over here, or did they fall over?
Most of them were fallen trees, but we did have to hire in a piece of machinery to get them over here because some of them are really heavy. Some we could move by hand and wheelbarrow, but some of the bigger ones that you can see, they were on, is it called a skid steer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think that if somebody had, say, one old mature tree in their garden and it's either fallen down or they've had to chop it down, but the stump's still in the ground and they want to do a stumpery, what would they do to get that tree stump out?
Tricky one. It'd be a lot of hard graft to try and dig that tree out, especially if it's a large tree.
Because the joy of the ones that have fallen over is we can see the shapes that the stumps roots make, and are they interesting? And if it's still in the ground, you don't actually know quite what's underneath, whether it's rotted off, whether it isn't actually an interesting shape. But you could use the stump that's in the ground as part of your design. And if you can find a few bits that are sitting around elsewhere to put around it to create a little bit of a feature, that would be a way of doing it.
So when you actually decided on placing the stumps, how did you decide them, Lucy?
With the bigger ones, it was like, well, we need to place them where we can actually get to with the machinery. The smaller ones were a lot easier. We could have a lot more choice with where we wanted to position them. And we wanted to position them so that as you came down the steps and looked from above, you could see the interesting shapes.
Presumably you can actually have one or two tree stumps, or you could have a great pile of them.
Yes, I think, you know, the high grove one, they're sort of all piled on top of each other, almost creating like walls with stumps. And we didn't want to go for that sort of look because we felt it was a bit imposing for this sort of area. Plus we wanted the individual stumps to speak for themselves. So I think it's all down to individual choice, really.
And when you were actually arranging the stumps in the garden, how did you do it?
Well, I just put them down until they looked right, really. But what I wanted to do was to make different heights. Because I have a small garden, I wanted to make different heights in this small area so that I could see plants. They weren't just all at one level. So the larger stumps, I could put them in and then kind of filled up the areas between the old roots with some soil. After a bit that washed away, which I hadn't thought of, so I got some old bits of slate that I actually had lying around in the garden, but you could use old bits of flower pot or anything, and kind of wedged the soil up in that area and then banked the soil up behind it so you don't really see it, and then I could plant there and the plants would grow over the slate, and that's worked quite well.
And Adam, what sort of planting, if you've got tree stumps either still in the ground or you've got them turned up and looking sculptural, what about planting around them?
Well, planting obviously will depend on the light and the soil, but in this area we've certainly chosen to go with ferns for structure, but you could go with almost anything.
So what about plants for stumperies?
Well, because my stumpery is so small, I wanted it to have all those little tiny plants which you see in pots and love them, but if you put them in your bigger borders, they just get lost. So I've got tiny little things like Narcissus elca, the spring bulbs, these beautiful little narcissus and little species tulips. I did have a couple of daffodils that I thought looked nice, and they turned out to be much too big, and that was completely wrong, so I've taken those out. Then also I've got the sweetest little ivy, which has the tiniest leaf. It's just growing over the stump, so it's almost like a little sort of doll's scene. And also recently I've got a euonymus, which is a creeping euonymus, which has tiny, tiny leaves. So I've planted that there as well. I planted grasses because I like that softness, because if you've got quite a lot of wood around, you want that soft focus. So I've got melica in there, which is very pretty at the moment with lots of little tiny white seeds. And that's lovely. Some ferns, but the ones with quite delicate fronds.
So it is a place to showcase a few special plants rather than...
Yeah, I think it's like the sort of Edwardian idea of like rockeries, when they went off to the Alps and wanted to reproduce them in their little gardens. I think it is that same feeling.
And I think this is really something for trend, because when I was at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show a few weeks ago, the Royal Entomological Society, which is I think the Royal Society of Insects is how we would understand it, had an amazing show garden which actually used tree trunks, stumps, all forms of logs, dead wood, and really kind of used stumps and logs and dead wood as the ornamentation for a garden. And of course it makes a fabulous environment for wildlife and for insects. If you've got tree roots still growing in the ground, rather like this big one here, and you need to plant around it, then what can you plant, and is there anything special about the actual planting you need to bear in mind?
I mean, we found that cyclamens and very shallow rooted things are good to plant around the tree roots. Certain ferns will grow in a shallow soil, but it depends obviously on your aspect as well. You need to decide which is going to be your shady side of the tree stump.
So it doesn't damage the tree stumps at all. You can just use whatever soil there is, but you presumably shouldn't be cutting into the actual tree root itself.
No. You shouldn't really cut into the tree root at all, but planting around certainly will work.
But like when you were saying earlier about doing things on a small scale, I mean, when people do the little ponds in their garden, or just those sort of areas that you've got for frogs and things like that, a little mini stumpery there would be perfect, because then you're also creating a habitat as well.
If you've got a difficult spot in your garden and you just don't know quite what to do with it, a shady spot or a difficult corner, then don't miss my garden design ideas for difficult parts of your garden playlist, which comes at the end of this video. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.